Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the W Conversation, a platform where women get together and discuss topics that are important to them and topics that matter. For those of you that are hearing about the W initiative for the first time, I'm just going to run you through what it is. We as Access Bank recognize that women need to be empowered, they need inspiration, and they also need to connect. So what we are offering under the W initiative is an array of products and services that are not limited to financial products only. What we're trying to do is reach women out there, women in business, the professional women, and women across all stages of life as they journey along would like to be the number one financial services partner. My name is Kalumbu Nyikosa, and I'm the head of corporate communications and brand management at Access Bank Zambia. Today, I'm joined by Mrs. Kawanda Lealo Pachilekwa, who is a co-founder at CC Gabriel and Partners. And I'm also joined by the lovely Cynthia Katongo, our legal counsel under Access Bank. Welcome, ladies. Thank you. Today, we're looking at will and estate planning, a very important topic for us as women and the men as well. But more importantly, we feel that a lot of the women out there do not have information around will and estate planning. So let's get straight into it. Kabanda, what is estate planning and why is it important for women?
What is estate planning? Believe it or not, despite being a lawyer, this is not something that I was particularly familiar with in that context. Even as a law student, what we would most likely do would be probate, and all we would talk about would be wills and intestate succession. And so for a very long time, that's what the focus is. As a lawyer, I would craft wills for clients. When we set up the law firm that we have now, CC Gabriel and Company, our vision at the firm is to see wealthy enterprises beyond generations. And what struck me as I kept consulting with clients, dealing with business people, women who own businesses, I realized that they don't really plan for how this wealth will transcend into generations. And that's how my passion for estate planning came up. And I just found that it's so alive. It's not as dead as a will or as dead as intestate succession. And I guess that's how my journey with estate planning started and my passion for this particular subject. In defining what estate planning is, you could describe it in so many ways. And it's a really simple concept. But my favorite definition is actually something that you find on Wikipedia. I write it down, I carry it in my bag so that I can keep reminding myself what it is. But this is how Wikipedia defines estate planning. It is a process of anticipating and arranging for the management and disposal of a person's estate during that person's life in preparation for future incapacity or death. There's the planning and preparation for your incapacity, should it arise, and you're then planning for how will my assets be preserved, managed, and distributed after I die.
We don't make plans for that. I don't know about you, Cynthia, and your experiences. Could it be that we're not having these conversations because maybe it's a cultural aspect? We're not planning around estate, or maybe most of us are thinking around physical assets for when I'm gone, but we're not thinking about when I'm incapacitated, when I'm older. Where am I, if I don't have children or I don't have anyone to take care of me, where am I going to go?
No, you're right, Colum. I always say, in our African context, we have always had estate planning. Each one of us was born with an embedded estate plan. And our estate plan was very clear. Your family looked after you. When you are born, your parents already know if they pass on, who's going to take these children on? Because their siblings will take on that role. Even when you passed on, if you go even deeper into our tradition, you will find that there was a requirement that if a woman is widowed, the husband's brother would take over the family. You know, it was an economic concept that we don't discuss as much as we should, but it was an estate plan. That's what would happen. So you really didn't have to worry and plan for your future in a sense. You just contributed to your family, ensured that they were able to carry that on. But now what has happened is that we have gotten a more westernized notion of living. We're living a lot more separately. We don't really have those sorts of connections with our siblings that they'll take over our children as a matter of course. We're very individualistic. And from that perspective, estate planning becomes critical. As we take on more westernized ways of living, we must begin to look at what are the tools that they use in the West to do some of these things that we're replacing. And that's why this conversation becomes absolutely important.
I know Kabanda mentioned something about the Interstate Succession Act. I don't know if you're going to speak to that as well, but what are the common components of an estate plan?
Yes, a will is basically a declaration of your wishes after you are gone. But then if you do it without a lawyer, highly likely it's not going to be valid. Because in there's a guide, okay? Who do you appoint as an executor? We're still talking about tradition, right? We're talking about if I do a will, I'm preparing to go very soon. And so in you saying, okay, let me do a will, I'll appoint a little child to be, like next of kin. You want to appoint someone that can make a decision, cannot even answer or explain. So there are all those things that come with that, but a will is important and lawyers are important in this process because it has to be valid. Yeah? So that will give a guideline, even the distribution, even how you deal with your beneficiaries also. If you don't do a will, someone else will decide, and it will still be the law to decide for you. That's where intestacy comes in. You start from section 5, it will tell you a situation of this type of, you first talk about the primary beneficiaries. So this is how you distribute, these are and the percentages in there. And so you go all the way up to section 8A on the different situations. Some do not have parents alive, some do not have children, others will not have dependents. So it goes on, but it starts with the ideal family of parents, dependents, a spouse, and children. So those are the two aspects. Well, when there's death in Zambia, the two laws will guide how do we handle this estate that's been left behind by the deceased. So you check is there a will, or if there was not, then it would be this way. And some estates, there's no one to claim. It's quite that the administrator general comes in, who is a corporation. So who the holder of that office stands as a person. So they will go to court and do the procedures of probate that human beings would do.
What you are essentially doing with trust is you're ring-fencing a portion of your assets for some particular purpose. Cynthia had mentioned that you can actually create a testamentary trust to deal with some of those issues that she's identifying. That you identified a guardian for your minor children in the will, but you want to address how will these children be looked after. So you can actually, in your will, embed a trust so that on your death, that trust consolidates and all the assets that you have listed as falling in that trust would then be cover those assets. And if these were properties that you were renting out, you then, again, a beauty of trust is you identify trustees who are managing the trust on your behalf. And they have duties under law, fiduciary duties, to ensure that they manage these assets in a prudent way, or else they can be held accountable by your children. So they then manage these assets for the benefit of your children, right? Until such a time that those assets can now be passed on to your children.
As Lope is saying, they could still be held accountable by the law. So it is not about, because people change.
What legal rights do women have regarding inheritance and property ownership? How can you encourage women to, or should you even encourage women to actually be involved in estate planning with their husbands? What rights do we have?
I will speak just beginning with generally on property rights and inheritance rights vis-a-vis women in Zambia. I'll say that despite all the horror stories that we heard, Nelia type, was it Nelia? That Neria type horror stories that each one of us has no doubt encountered at some point in our lives, whether it was our mother, whether it was our aunt, whether it's a friend. Despite those, you find that Zambia has a very useful protection for property rights for women. You find that basically under the Constitution, as a woman, you have, first, as a person, you have the right to own property, whether individually or jointly or as a group. That right is enshrined, that you have, and no one can deprive you of that property. But to sort of take an angle of removing it from just as a person, but as a woman, we then have non-discrimination provisions in the Constitution that say that I will not be discriminated against because I'm a woman. So if a person is entitled to property, as a woman, I am entitled to property. You find that, again, legislation that deals with land, for instance, recognizes a person's right to own property. And again, that's entrenched. Because of the non-discrimination provisions in the Constitution, it applies to me as well, as a woman. I guess the government of Zambia has also been very interested in pushing property rights for women in Zambia. I know that sometime in 2001, I think, the land policy was actually saying we want to ensure that 50% of land in Zambia is owned by women. So you find that, yes, the framework is there, the protections are there, the policy intentions are actually there, but we need to then be discussing how is that then translating on the ground. I'll speak again to the Interstate Succession Act. The Interstate Succession Act says, in terms of inheritance, that if someone dies without a will, there's a list of who is entitled to inherit, and at the top is a spouse. And so that's a recognition, because a spouse could be either a man or a woman. So as a woman, you are entitled to inherit. That particular act, in its nuances, actually sets aside some assets before the distribution. The matrimonial home belongs to you as the surviving spouse. So you can see that we have a robust framework for actually protecting property rights, inheritance rights for women. The question that arises, how is this actually translating on the ground? And I guess some of the challenges that we face have to do with our customs and traditions and an information gap. So because of our customs, our cultural context, and because of our traditions, you then find that even as women, we believe that, you know, our husband should own all the property. It's so bad that we're thinking that's how you show respect to a man, to ensure that he's the one as the provider who owns the property, and then he will make sure that you are taken care of.
I just want you, in closing, to your words to any woman out there in terms of resources and support available for women that are seeking guidance on estate planning, whether it's with a private practice, whether it's with legal aid clinic, or all these bodies that are there to support women. Remember, we keep emphasizing an informed woman is an empowered woman. Sometimes the woman has information, but she doesn't have the resources. How do we ensure that the W community, the community of women, are empowered, whether it's through information or the resources and support that they need to get help around estate planning?
So the first thing that I would encourage every woman, your level, the mass level, is that you take interest in information around asset planning. Financial literacy with our bank, we do a lot of financial literacy. It's also one of the avenues that should be taken seriously by every woman. So financial literacy becomes very important, and also not being shy or not waiting when things have gone bad. You know, I think a lot of resources have been invested into these organizations that we're talking about. They're quite a lot, NGO, public, even the private sector. I mean, we bring in the financial literacy, but also the women's rights aspect. It's important, you know, to really take interest. And we are not saying women become rebels and don't think your husband should be the one to own property. He can own the property, but also have that conversation and ask that this property, do we want to entrust it in children's names, or when you jointly own property, please really check your name is there. If it's an account, know that you also signed, because an account name can be anything. Yeah, that you also signed. Let's make use of those opportunities. We grab them, and thank you, Kalumbu, that for the bank you are doing this. You won't believe how many calls I received. People do have issues. Yes, oh, that issue that day you talked about this. This is the situation you have, and also the issue of the dependence. There are fights. The 10%, no, but I lived in this house. I grew up in this house. You're no longer a dependent. It's not like when you were once a dependent, you're forever a dependent. You're not a minor. You've grown, you've moved on. The children, hey, doesn't fall off. The children, they still remain the children. And also this belief of our daughter was there when you bought this. Our daughter, it's not divorce that has happened, it's death that has happened. And where there's no will, the will, the act actually recognizes this one spouse you may not like will actually have that bigger chunk. But we just believe it was our relative. And it's also us as women, not just to talk about being the victims, but also being the perpetrators. It's my brothers, it's my uncles, it's my. Also, we need to know that the law is not silent as to how estate should be distributed.
Basically, the law
Yeah.
protects both the man and the woman.
Yes, everyone is protected, but we treat the law. I'm not a lawyer. No, just read. You'll be so amazed. And say, okay, it's so straightforward. It's straightforward, plain English. Yeah, it's nothing complicated. So it's important that we take interest as women, and also know that we can make the investments. The insurance policies that start from very minimal amounts, really. They're not that expensive. So a drop in a bucket, fill the bucket. So that little money that you're putting away can also, as Lopa said, also know that you can own property. So put something aside, or you'd need that service.
We pride ourselves being managers. We manage our homes.
Multitaskers.
Yes. We really pride ourselves at doing that. And I think that we need to begin to change our mindsets and begin to understand that this is another component that we really need to manage. The other day on LinkedIn, a particular lawyer who does commentary for cases picked a particular case to do a commentary on. Very sad reading. And as I was sort of following the comments that people were posting, it kind of struck me that the problem is we really don't know how these issues can impact us at a real level, not an imaginary I'm a financial guru, no, at a real level. This particular case, a man married a woman. She had kids from a previous marriage, and he raised his children as his own. They had his surname. He raised them as his children. he died interstate, and yeah, no, these are not your children. These are not your children. And so, really being mindful that as part of an estate plan, those sorts of things arise. You see what I mean? Because if you then sit down and sit with a professional, you are then saying, okay, fine, okay, these are your dependents. What's the idea here? Okay, so now adopt them. Yeah, adopt them, because you might name them in a will, but you might have an insurance policy that says biological children. So, you're really thinking, okay, so you've got to sort of map that out as well. Okay, yeah, so there's these properties. What will now need to happen is we'll need to change ownership, do a conveyance, move it to this particular person, add this particular person. And those are all things that you're sort of looking at. Because you will find yourself in a position where clearly it was that man's intention to provide for those children. Yes. Having died interstate, they didn't fall under the category of children, and therefore they were deprived.
Just a summary of if I were to take away key pointers, the definition that was given by Kabanda from the very beginning, it is planning and managing during your lifetime and for post your lifetime, and also consider areas of incapacitation. If we don't plan, others will plan for us. We may not be around. It won't bother us because we have gone up yonder or wherever. But the people that you leave behind, your children, your mother, your spouse, whether so I keep saying the women because really this is about W conversations, but I know that we get the support of the men in our lives, our siblings, our brothers, our uncles, our husbands. If you're out there listening, you still need to plan to ensure that the people that depend on you are taken care of. Thank you very much. It would have been interesting if this was going to be a conversation with a room of women. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of questions, but the whole idea of this conversation is it's going to be online, and I'm hoping that we will get as many queries as possible, even in our feed, and we can continue these conversations. Thank you so much, and yeah, let's continue inspiring, connecting, and empowering. Bye-bye.